So just before I begin, I just want to also express my appreciation for the invitation to be here at this event, which is focused on the spoken word and on sharing ideas among people who have similar interests, but perhaps differing interpretations. So it's interesting for us to be able to come together in this way and to share our, through language, to share our evaluation of what it is that we've read, and to try to learn from one another and to confront our ideas as well, which is an important part of, some of the political dysfunction that we talked about earlier this morning. Some of what's missing from that. So in what I've just learned this morning from David Gill, which was that Jacques Ellul had the habit of writing things in longhand. That's also something that I do. So rather than read to you my paper, I've taken some notes, and I'm going to be speaking to you based on those longhand notes. So in 2022, I first came into contact with the association, the society, the Jacques Ellul Society. And at that time, the theme that we were addressing was art in the technological society. I was finishing up my master's degree at that time, and I was looking at restoring our lyrical relationship to water. And why lyrical? Because a lyrical relationship fosters in us a sense of reverence, a sense of respect. It fosters awe, and therefore leads us to want to respect the entity in and of itself, not as what it can give us, not as what we can extract from it in terms of its utility, but in terms of its own essence, in terms of its own existence. Something that is therefore beyond the reach of our understanding and mastery, something that is greater than its technical definition or utility. And so it is in that sense that I first started to read Jacques Ellul and be inspired by some of what I was reading there. I recently read also Heidegger's 1962 essay on the question of technology, and would like to share some of that with you because I think it enriches my reading of Ellul as well. He talks about the essence of technique as an enframing. And enframing is something that he defines as a way of revealing. And when he talks about revealing, he's talking about revealing the essence or the truth of something. So technique is a way of revealing, having the character of destining. And it is the way, in Heidegger's words, the way that challenges forth. And it's challenging forth because it is teasing out of the thing a destiny for it, a destination that is other than its own essence, other than what it would be if we weren't challenging it forth to be something else. He talks about that as the ordering of the real as a standing reserve. And I know that yesterday Christian Roy, I believe, was making reference to the standing reserve as a way of perceiving nature that was identified by Heidegger as being associated with technique. So art, in contrast, lyricism, art, the lyrical approach, is also a way of revealing. It is a way of revealing the essence of a thing that is not a challenging forth. It's not perceiving it as what can be extracted from it, what can be brought out of it. How can I consider this as a standing reserve? But rather, what is this thing? What is the nature of the thing? And it allows us to approach it in a way that we can't always necessarily approach it when our approach is linguistic or technical or political or otherwise. And I think we saw a little bit of that last night as well with T-Bone's presentation. So I talked earlier about awe, and today I'm going to talk to you about joy, as is mentioned in the title of my presentation. And the two are related. The two are what I consider to be human finalities. The finalities of technique, if there is a finality, which Ellul postulates there is not. Ellul postulates that the only finality of technique is a sort of constant perpetuation. But other finalities of technique that some of our other presenters have touched upon might be power, control, or domination. And I would like to take us, therefore, away from some of these finalities and towards a human finality, which is joy. So for Ellul, as for Heidegger, beyond the problem of the destruction of the natural world through bringing into order a standing reserve, which Heidegger terms as enframing, but for Ellul, he talks about the effacing of the natural world, its erasure and complete replacement by a technical system. Beyond the problem, therefore, of the destruction of the natural world that engenders, is the question of freedom, our freedom that is very much threatened by this notion of enframing or effacing of the natural world. How many of you came through the airport security on your way here? Like, that is a really great example of our freedom being effaced, being removed, and being replaced by technical systems. So just the freedom of passing from one place to another, which used to be done quite naturally on foot, crossing borders, then became something that was necessary to do. So we had a human interaction at borders where we had a border guard. You would cross and speak to the person, and now there is an entire system in place, a very dehumanizing system that doesn't treat us as people, but that really treats us as a standing reserve that you need to take from one place and shift through to another place in the most efficient way possible. So this is how we see some of that enframing or effacing of natural systems playing out in the world. And it is a trade-off. There's something that we're trading. We're giving up our freedom, but we're giving it up because we're getting something, or at least we're supposed to be getting something. So what I would like to postulate today, my argument really hinges on a comparison and an uncovering in the Heidegger's use of that term, an uncovering of what it is that we're trading off. What is at the base of nature's promise to us? And what is at the base of technique's promise to us? Because there has to be something. It doesn't just, yes, it can be auto-propagating and so on, but there has to be a reason why it exists in human society. And my proposal is that nature proposes sufficiency. Nature proposes that everything that is included in the natural world is sufficient for our needs. Sufficient meaning it's enough. Meaning, it might not be more than what we need, it might not allow us to live beyond our means, but it will be enough. Technique, on the other hand, promises satiety. Satiety, I define as the constant fulfillment of need before it emerges as such. So technique does promise something, and that promise is attractive enough to us that we are currently giving up our freedom in order to have a chance at this promise of satiety, fulfillment of need before it emerges as such. Back to sufficiency, embedded in sufficiency is, of course, insufficiency, is lack. So in the promise of sufficiency, you will have enough, but you might not have enough today. You might not have enough next year. Maybe today you'll be fine, you'll have enough to eat, but maybe next year there will be a bad harvest, and you're going to have to find a way to get through that. That's the promise of sufficiency. It's not an easy one. It's one that includes a notion of lack and of struggle and of endurance. And all of those notions are intolerable to technique. Technique, as Ellul describes it, values smoothness, values efficiency, values optimization. And so insufficiency, any situation of insufficiency is absolutely intolerable to technique. So recall the notion of the standing reserve. Technique evaluates the world in terms of standing reserve. So nature becomes simply a pantry and an energy storage unit of standing reserves for us that is to ensure our satiety, our constant satiety, our fulfilling of need before it's able to be expressed as a need. I came across recently, now I'm going to go deviate a little bit into pop culture, because I came across recently a video of Keanu Reeves. I'm a big Keanu Reeves fan, Canadian actor. And he was telling an anecdote about his famous film, The Matrix, which I'm a big fan of also. And he was talking about the fact that he was in a social situation with a friend, and there were some younger people there who'd never seen the film, which is surprising. It's not that old of a film. They'd never seen it. So he was describing the plot of the film to the kids who were present, the young teens who were present. And he was saying, you know, it's about this guy, and he's in a world, and he's not really sure what's real and what's not real. And the teenage girl says to him, who cares? And Keanu Reeves was very taken aback by this, as are we. But really, that's the question that I'd like to answer today, is who cares? Because if we don't care, that means that we're already much farther along the path that Danielle has just described to us than we hoped that we would be at this point. So how does this play out? How does this current situation of technical satiety, the promise of satiety, play out? It plays out through social programs. We have a policy which many, in Montreal, which I think many cities have adopted, which is the zero accident policy. The zero accident policy strives towards perfect road transit, causing zero accidents. And strangely, this sounds like a wonderful objective, but strangely it can have very odd consequences on control of behavior and removal of freedoms as well. So zero accident, zero tolerance to accidents, the eradication of poverty, which is often put forward as an objective as well. Eradication of poverty, well, we know what this leads to. This leads to communism. We've tried that. It could lead to other also strange social experiments. Poverty is intolerable to technique. Poverty as an insufficiency, as a state of permanent insufficiency, is intolerable. So while I think that Ellul would probably, not be in favor of encouraging poverty, is it something that we're willing to tolerate as a situation that exists in nature, such as do accidents as well? Materially, how does this play out? In the supply chain, we have come to rely on electricity that never fails, the internet that never fails, transportation systems that never fail, food systems that never fail. So, when we think about food lack that previous generations have had to tolerate, we don't have that now. The technical system has made sure that our supply chain is constant and smooth and efficient, and our cupboards are constantly replenished. Recently in Houston, I think over this past week, because of Hurricane Beryl, electricity was knocked out, and it caused tremendous suffering for the people that were there. So these systems that we put into place, once we've put them into place, we can no longer roll them back. This is another feature of the technical system, very much like those iron teeth that they put on the roads when they don't want you to drive through. So you can roll over them, but you can never roll back. You can never roll back.
Extreme tire damage.
Yes. Extreme social damage if you were to remove our access to electricity, to the internet, to transport, to any of these large technical systems would cause extreme social damage, and in fact may cause social uprisings. So that's where we are, and the solution of the technical system is, well, in order to achieve these things, what we need is actually more of what we're already doing. So we need more data, we need better data, we need measuring, we need ordering, we need more efficiency. And recently, Bill Gates talked about using AI as a means of solving inequities. So inequities, rather than being, saying what can we do for the people that are here, it's how do we solve them? How do we get rid of them? Actually, this is not something that we can tolerate. We don't want to see it. Poverty, accidents, anything negative, any lack, any pénurie, we want to make it invisible. It is intolerable to the technical system. AI is going to be the next thing we're going to apply to it. But what if we do achieve these goals? What if we do arrive at zero accidents, eradication of poverty, perfect supply chain, and so on? First of all, the inevitability of the strain on Earth's resources. It is technically impossible to be able to fulfill the promise of technique because the natural world simply cannot sustain it. And we've seen this already in the strain on water tables, for example. Cities rely heavily on water. Human populations rely heavily on water. It's not just in industrial practices, but agricultural practices. And for human needs, we require water to live. And we see now that we are extracting more water in the name of efficiency. We're better and better at it. We're able to dig deeper and to pump farther. And so we're extracting more and more efficiently the very resource that we rely on. And in doing so, we're depleting it at a rate faster than the rate at which it can replenish itself. So that's the first risk, is the strain on Earth's resources. Second of all, is our willingness to accept increased control on behavior and to relinquish information. So if we want to have better data, better measurements, and so on, we have to agree to relinquish that to the technical system for the betterment of the system. And I had a really interesting interaction yesterday. I know some of this is anecdotal, but yesterday evening we went to CVS to pick up some nuts and some aspirin. And we noticed there was a tremendous price difference if you're a member and if you're not a member. And so when we went to the cash, we were told, oh, it's this much. And we were like, oh, we thought it was this much. And the lady very kindly explained to us, well, you need to be a member. But to be a member, you need to sign up. You need to give away your information and so on. Of course, your name, And so I said, okay, well, that's worth a couple bucks, right? As we all do. We're all willing to give up. I mean, at this point, we're used to it. So I gave her my information, and she said to me, I'm going to ask you to go through a number of screens on which you're going to say yes. But when you get to the screen that says, do you accept that we send you information and that we use your information, she softly said, you don't have to say yes. And it felt like a little moment of treason. It really did. So that's the second risk that we face if we actually achieve the goal of satiety that technique is promising, is that we're going to give up our personal freedoms, essentially. And thirdly, and this is where in my paper I actually go into a long example here. Thirdly, our humanity is weakened because we are accustomed, we become unaccustomed to that feeling of want, to that feeling of lack, to the feeling of not always having our needs fulfilled. If anybody has ever fasted, you'll know how difficult it is to not have your needs fulfilled, even for 24 hours. But you'll also know that coming out of that is extremely rewarding and can give you insights that you wouldn't have otherwise had. And similarly, if we relinquish a certain satiety, if we're willing to risk it, if we're willing to go through periods where we don't always have enough, there is an immense reward to that. The example that I give in my paper is I talk about how this is actually programmed into us as humans from birth with breastfeeding. Because the baby cries in order to be fed. And in fact, the baby must cry in order to be fed. It must cry because it learns that it needs to communicate with the mother. And if you take that away, if you simply give the baby milk every time it needs milk before the need emerges as a need, the baby won't learn human interaction. It won't learn to communicate. It won't learn what it is to feel a need and then to have that need fulfilled. So there's a whole range of human behaviors that are intrinsic to the human experience that are lost unless we're able to feel a lack and a need. So Ellul gives a hint of this, gives a hint in this direction. And I know we talked a little bit about yesterday, we talked a little bit about the fact that he wasn't really strong on giving solutions. But he does give a little bit of a hint in this direction. He tends to be more diagnostic than prescriptive. And this is from a paper that David Gill suggested that I read and very kindly sent me a copy of, which is entitled Nature, Technique, and Artificiality, that was published in Research in Philosophy and Technology. And it's actually the first time I come across a mention of joy in the writing of Ellul, which is something that I was looking for in my reading. So he gives two directions, proposes two orientations. The first is recognition as opposed to desire. Recognition, and I'm quoting him here, recognition in the sense of joy and gratitude for what we have, for what we are, and for what we have been given. Recognition instead of demands, as against the whole school influenced by Marxism, which makes class struggle the beginning and the end of every explanation and all behavior. So, okay, getting rid of the critique of Marxism, which is kind of a hallmark of Ellul, let's just focus here on recognition and the fact that he's pointing to recognition in the sense of expressing our joy and our gratitude for what it is that we do have access to. And secondly, he talks about the attempt to find and to set voluntary limits on action. This is something that we're not very good at, and collectively, certainly we're failing right now to do that when confronted with some of our biggest existential threats that we've ever been confronted with. But even on an individual level, I would argue that it's extremely against our nature to set voluntary limits. He says, to set limits, to give up his power, not to do everything it is possible to do, to reject the always more, larger, faster, to refuse both the temptation to unlimitedness, the conquest of space, for example, and the identification of freedom with the disappearance of limits. To learn, on the contrary, that it is the formulation of limits on his own action that is the act of freedom par excellence. He doesn't say the formulation of limits by whom. And I would like to add here that, in my opinion, the formulation of limits can only be by nature itself. Because whenever the state has tried to formulate limits, it's been a failure. There has been an excessively high price to pay for the state formulating those limits. It becomes extremely complicated. There are all kinds of unintended negative consequences. We know the state can go too far in imposing limits. When the individual tries to impose limits on our own self, well, human weakness makes that extremely difficult as well. So I would postulate that it's by respecting nature's limits that we can find a way through this. And in conclusion, the risk of lack, it is the risk of lack that leads us to awe. And that risk is, in fact, the ultimate risk, which is the risk of death. And I had a quote here that I'm not finding now, but it was from, because I had it on my phone and my phone auto-scrolled. So it's from a very long commencement speech by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who talks about, he essentially says, look, the fact that we die means that our purpose on life can't just be to buy things and consume them. It's got to be something more than that. Otherwise, it wouldn't end in death. Like, death is there to remind us that we're here to do more and to be more and to strive for more. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the finite aspect of sufficiency. The sufficiency that is offered by nature is what allows us to experience joy when we finally achieve what it is that we're striving for. And I would say that the answer to the young girl that asked the question of Keanu Reeves, who cares? Who cares? The answer to that would be the great work that is Beethoven's Ode to Joy. Because Beethoven did not arrive at that through facility. He didn't sit down one day at the start of his career and say, I'm going to write the Ode to Joy. It took him 9 symphonies to get there, and it took him a tremendous amount of suffering. It took him the loss of his hearing to make music all that more important to him, so that finally he put himself on the stage in the form of the baritone soloist to stop the orchestra and to say, friends, I don't want to hear these sounds anymore. What I'm here to tell you is I love you, and we're here to talk about joy. Thank you.